Layla Mansour's body would be found in 6 pieces, each wrapped in a page torn from the Holy Quran. And the man who did it wasn't a mad stranger. He was her husband, a man once celebrated for teaching others how to be closer to God. If you're fascinated by the thin line between faith and fanaticism, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about devotion, love, and control. But let's go back to where it all began. In the shimmering city of Dubai, where glass towers reached toward heaven and the desert wind carried the echo of the call to prayer, Yassin al-Karim was a man admired by many. A scholar of religion, gifted with words that could calm restless crowds, he led evening lectures at Al-Nur Mosque. His voice was smooth, magnetic, filled with conviction that made people believe. To his students, he was a modern man of faith. To his wife, Layla, he was a mystery growing darker each day. Layla worked in finance, one of the rare Emirati women who built her own career outside family influence. She was educated, self-assured, and quietly proud of her independence. But lately, home had begun to feel like a shrine rather than an apartment. Yassin had replaced their artwork with framed verses, removed her perfumes from the dressing table, and insisted she cover her hair even in private. At first, she thought it was a phase, a man seeking comfort in religion after a stressful year. But it wasn't comfort, it was control. He started keeping a small leather notebook filled with scribbles and symbolic drawings. 6 circles, each labeled with one of the 6 articles of faith. "Do you know what these represent?" he asked her one night. "They're the pillars of belief, the foundation of all that is pure. Without them, a soul is dust, scattered and forgotten." She smiled faintly. "Faith is supposed to liberate us, Yassin, not trap us." He looked at her, eyes narrow. "That's what women like you never understand. Submission is freedom." That conversation marked the beginning of their silent war. Layla's friends noticed she stopped answering calls. Her coworkers whispered that she looked drained. But what no one saw was how Yassin's private world was collapsing into paranoia. He had grown obsessed with purity, not just spiritual, but physical. He asked Layla to stop meeting male colleagues, then stopped her from leaving the apartment altogether. And when she resisted, he accused her of bringing shame into their home. One evening, while Layla prepared dinner, she found one of his sermons on his tablet. His voice recorded in secret. "The unfaithful wife," he said, "corrupts the heart of the believer. Sometimes, purification must come not through prayer, but through sacrifice." The room seemed to grow colder as she listened, realizing he wasn't speaking hypothetically. That night, she confronted him. "You sound like a man preparing for judgment, not salvation." He smiled, a slow, unnerving smile. "Maybe both," he whispered. "Maybe judgment is the only kind of salvation left." Outside, Dubai's skyline glowed with luxury and progress. Inside their penthouse, a woman understood for the first time that her husband no longer believed she was human. He believed she was an impurity he needed to cleanse. Her story was only beginning, but the foundation of her faith and her life had already begun to crack. The first time Layla saw the notebook again, it was on the prayer rug beside her husband's knees. Thick black ink covered every page, words spiraling like the fevered thoughts of a man possessed. At the center of one page were 6 circles connected by blood-colored lines, and beneath them, he had written, "Faith is pure when the impure has been removed." Layla froze. "Yassin, what is this?" He didn't look up. "Preparation," he murmured. That word lingered with her all day. She stopped sleeping through the night. Every small sound, the soft click of the front door, the hum of his whispered prayers, made her heart jump. Yassin had started praying longer than ever before, often past midnight, his voice carrying through the marble halls in hypnotic repetition. But his prayers no longer sounded peaceful. They sounded expectant, almost bargaining. He had once been a calm man, methodical, reasonable, admired by hundreds. But now, even the congregation whispered about his sermons. His tone had changed. His words were sharp, condemning, directed not at sin itself, but at sinners, at women. "Faith tests a man's strength through the weakness of others," he told his audience one night. And sometimes the greatest trial is the woman in your home. The crowd had murmured in uneasy agreement. Only one person, a young man sitting near the back, looked disturbed enough to report the sermon anonymously. That report would later become part of a homicide case. Layla stopped attending Friday prayers. She told her friend Miriam she was sick, but Miriam didn't believe her. "He's isolating you," she warned over a hushed phone call. That's how it starts. They wear faith like armor and use it to silence you. Layla wanted to listen, but a part of her still believed she could save him, that the man she married was trapped beneath the layers of fanaticism, waiting to be found again. That illusion shattered one morning when she found one of her wristwatches missing. In its place on her vanity lay a folded note written in Yasin's handwriting. One for Allah, one for the angels. At first, she didn't understand. But as the days passed, she noticed other objects gone. Her jewelry box, her favorite perfume bottle, even her mother's prayer beads. Every missing piece was replaced with a new note. One for the books, one for the prophets, one for the afterlife, one for destiny. 6 notes in total, 6 offerings. Layla felt her blood go cold. He was reenacting the 6 pillars of faith, not as beliefs, but as items of sacrifice. She confronted him, trembling, but his calm expression terrified her more than rage ever could. "You're making offerings out of my belongings." "I'm purifying our home," he answered peacefully. "Don't you feel it? Less noise, less corruption. Faith isn't about objects, Yasin. It's about conscience." "Then let your conscience be still," he hissed. "You talk as if you're above me, above God. You're not the believer I thought you were, Layla. You have lost your purity." The final straw came days later, when Layla caught him staring at her reflection in the mirror as if it no longer belonged to her. He whispered verses under his breath while tracing invisible lines in the air with his fingers, cutting across her throat. She slammed the door and fled to the balcony, the city glittering beneath her feet like a mirage of freedom she could no longer reach. That night, she packed a small suitcase. Inside went her passport, her ring, and a USB drive containing Yasin's recorded sermons. She planned to leave while he led far prayer at the mosque. But when she woke at dawn, the apartment door was locked from the outside, the windows sealed, her phone missing. From the other side of the door came his voice, gentle, almost loving. "Layla, do you know why there are 6 pillars of faith?" Silence. "Because belief must be complete. 6 truths, 6 purifications. Only then is the soul redeemed." She didn't answer. Her heart pounded as she pressed her ear to the wood. For a moment, all she heard was his breathing, calm, steady, terrifying in its serenity. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we will begin the 7th. Then he walked away. Layla slid to the floor, tears streaming down her face, whispering a prayer into the cold silence. It was the first time in months she had prayed not for faith, but for survival. The neighbors in Burj Crescent Tower would later say they heard nothing that night. No screams, no fighting, only the muffled echo of a man reciting verses long after midnight. The city outside glittered as usual, unaware of the madness unfolding behind one locked penthouse door. Inside, the scent of incense was suffocating. Thick smoke coiled toward the ceiling like restless spirits. The lights were dim, and every object in the room had been moved. The furniture, the drapes, even the mirrors. The apartment no longer looked like a home. It looked like a shrine. Layla stood barefoot on the cold marble, trembling. Her wrists were bound with silk scarf, knots that weren't meant to hurt, but to humble. Yasin had told her it was a ceremony of rebirth. He spoke softly, and that made it worse. "Faith must be pure," he whispered, "and purity comes only after confession." "I have nothing to confess," she said, her voice shaking. "I've done nothing wrong." "You've doubted," he replied calmly. "You've questioned the binding thread of obedience. But tonight, you will return to truth." On the floor before them, his notebook lay open, the same one she had feared for weeks. Each page bore a new line of text written in crimson ink, one for each pillar of faith. He knelt before it now, muttering the sequence like a formula, his voice lowering and rising with the rhythm of prayer. Belief in Allah, he said solemnly, in his angels, in his books, in his prophets, in the last day, and in destiny, both good and evil. He looked up at her, eyes glassy with devotion. 6 truths, 6 purifications, 6 parts. Layla's breath quickened as she realized what he meant. The words were no longer metaphor. They were instructions. She tried to move backward, but her legs wouldn't respond. The silk bindings cut slightly into her skin as she pulled, but he only smiled, smoothing them gently like a lover. Yasin, she pleaded, listen to yourself. This isn't faith, this is madness. He shook his head. No, Layla. This is what faith truly demands, surrender. You told me once that faith should liberate us. You were right. It liberates the soul from the flesh. He took a small silver blade from the table, polished, ceremonial, ancient. It wasn't a weapon in his mind. It was an instrument of cleansing. His hands didn't tremble. Her screams caught in her throat before they ever left her lips. The only sound that escaped the room was his steady voice reciting a verse about forgiveness. Outside, dawn crept up the desert horizon. By the time the first call to prayer sounded, the ritual was complete. He stood in the middle of the room, tears streaming down his face, surrounded by silence. The marble floor around him gleamed with reflections he refused to see. Instead, he placed 6 small parcels, wrapped in cloth, carefully folded, within a handcrafted wooden chest. Each package was marked with a single Arabic word written in gold ink. Allah, Malaika, Kitab, Rizal, Qaima, Qadar. When he finished, he sat beside them, calm, empty, purified in his own delusion. He wrote a final note in his notebook, faith restored. Then he prayed, whispering Layla's name between verses as if calling her spirit to witness what he believed to be an act of devotion rather than destruction. Layla Mansour's disappearance would trouble Dubai for days before the truth emerged, but that horror belongs to the next chapter, when faith meets investigation and the mask of holiness finally collapses under justice's light. The call came just after sunset. A housekeeping attendant at Burj Crescent Tower reported a foul smell coming from penthouse 42B. The guest, a religious scholar named Yasin Al-Karim, hadn't been seen for 3 days. His car was gone, but his apartment key was still registered to the building. Detective Farah Nadim arrived an hour later. She had seen dozens of domestic cases during her years with Dubai police, but none had ever begun with a verse. The first thing she noticed when the door was forced open was the sound. Faint, echoing, mechanical. A small speaker in the living room played Quranic recitations on loop. The scent of burning oud filled the air, and the smell beneath it unmistakable. The apartment was immaculate, unnervingly so. Furniture draped in linen sheets. Mirrors covered. A prayer rug positioned exactly between 2 narrow lines of candle wax. On the floor stood a wooden chest engraved with the word Tawheed, unity of God. Its hinges were gilded, but the lock had been crudely broken, as if someone fled in haste. Farah crouched beside it, noting the faint reddish stains around the edges. "Open it," she said quietly. The officer hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside were 6 parcels wrapped in white cloth and bound with golden thread. Each package carried an Arabic inscription in neat handwriting. Allah, Malaika, Kitab, Rizal, Qaima, Qadar. The smell was overpowering. Farah backed away, hand covering her mouth. "Close it," she whispered. The air in the room thickened with a silence that felt alive. The forensics team spent hours cataloging evidence. Yasin's notebook, half burned in the sink. His laptop, password protected. Dozens of voice recordings labeled with dates and Quran verse numbers. One recording, however, stood out, time-stamped 2 nights earlier. Farah listened to it alone in her car as the city lights glittered outside. Yasin's voice was calm, measured. There can be no faith without sacrifice. For belief to survive, impurity must perish. She will be divided as faith itself was divided. 6 parts, 6 principles, 6 offerings before God. She stopped the playback, her hands trembling. It wasn't a confession. It was a sermon to himself. The next morning, Interpol issued a region-wide alert. Yasin's passport data showed he had boarded a private charter flight to Muscat hours before the call was made. But what he didn't know was that Layla's last act would be the key to his capture. Hidden inside one of her locked drawers, Farah found a USB labeled only with a crescent moon. Inside were recordings Layla had made secretly, audio clips of Yasin's increasingly unhinged sermons from their home. In the final clip, Layla's voice shook as she spoke into her phone. If anything happens to me, it's because Yasin believes he can save me through death. He says I will thank him in the afterlife. That file would become the center of one of the most talked about murder trials in Emirati history. But for now, Farah stood on that balcony overlooking the glittering city, feeling the desert wind move through her hair, a lonely witness to another crime committed in the name of purity. She whispered under her breath, "There's no purity in fear, Yasin, only power." Below her, the sounds of evening prayer echoed through the streets, hauntingly beautiful yet hollow, like truth twisted out of shape. For the people listening, it was just another prayer. For Detective Farah Nadim, it was the sound of God being used as an alibi. They caught him outside a mosque in Muscat, 3 weeks after the body was found. Yasin al-Karim was delivering a private lecture to a handful of students about spiritual renewal when the police surrounded him. He didn't resist arrest. In fact, he smiled, softly, serenely, as they handcuffed him. "It's finished then," he said, looking toward the sky. "The purification is complete." Detective Farah Nadim stood behind the observation glass during the first interrogation. She'd seen killers talk about guilt, rage, jealousy, but never holiness. Yasin spoke of Layla as if she were still alive in some celestial place that only he could see. "She thanked me," he told the investigators. "Her soul rose clean. You can't understand. She was trapped in sin, in greed, in the modern world's decay. I helped her return." Farah leaned forward, studying him through the glass. His voice contained no madness, just conviction. And that terrified her most of all. Over the following weeks, his trial drew crowds larger than any sermon he had ever delivered. The courtroom was tightly controlled, the air conditioning humming against the desert heat. Cameras weren't allowed, but his words spread anyway, through whispers, through the fever of curiosity that came whenever religion and blood mixed in the same sentence. The prosecution presented the evidence systematically. Layla's USB recordings, his burned notebook, his voice memo describing 6 sacred divisions. Each piece slotted together perfectly, a puzzle of obsession and delusion. But Yasin acted as if it were all preordained. During testimony, he recited verses instead of answers. He refused legal counsel, claiming God is my witness and my defense. When the prosecutor asked if he had killed his wife, his reply chilled the entire courtroom. "I released her," he said, "just as the soul is released from the body when faith is complete. She is not dead. She is what you fail to be, pure." The gallery murmured. Journalists scribbled furiously. The judge warned him to stop preaching, but Yasin only smiled. "You can imprison flesh," he said, "but belief cannot decay." Outside, posters of Layla's face hung across the city, a haunting reminder of what had been done to her. Women's rights groups marched along Sheikh Zayed Road carrying candles. The media called it the faith murder. Clerics across the region debated on talk shows whether Yasin's fanaticism was an anomaly or a reflection of something deeper, buried in silence within their communities. Farah received messages from women she'd never met, thanking her for being the voice of the investigation. But to her, justice still felt hollow. Layla's body might have been accounted for, but her story was still being twisted, used by men who saw martyrdom where there was only murder. On the final day of the trial, Farah requested one more interview. The judge granted it on condition of silence between them, except for direct responses. Yet when she entered the sterile prison room, Yasin smiled as though seeing an old friend. "You believe I am evil," he said, tilting his head. "But tell me, detective, how many men like me pray while their hearts rot with lies?" At least I acted in truth. No, she answered quietly. You acted out of fear. He frowned. Fear of what? Of a woman who refused to be smaller than your God. Those words silenced him for the first time. Farah set a recording device on the table. She pressed play. Layla's final voice memo filled the room. Soft, trembling, almost whispering through death's edge. If belief means killing, then perhaps the unbelievers are the merciful ones. For a fleeting second, Yasin's composure cracked. His eyes darted toward the ceiling, his lips moving wordlessly. Then he laughed, the kind of laughter that sounds like breaking glass. Even now, he said, she tempts you. Her voice controls you. Farah stood up. No, Yasin. Her voice freed us all. When the verdict came, there was no celebration, only silence. Yasin al-Karim was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The judge's words echoed against the marble walls like a sermon turned upside down. In faith, there is no permission for arrogance. In devotion, there is no excuse for cruelty. You use God to justify fear. You called murder salvation. But truth is unbreakable, and justice is not yours to define. After sentencing, Yasin recited verses until guards carried him out. Even then, his followers outside the courthouse called him the martyr of purity. His influence would fade but not end. Every extreme belief leaves behind a spark waiting for oxygen. Months later, Detective Farah visited the empty penthouse. It had been sealed for renovation, its former luxury stripped bare. The scent of oud was gone, replaced by dust and silence. She stood where the wooden chest once sat, her reflection faint in the window pane overlooking the glittering skyline. She opened her notebook, where she had written the 6 Arabic words found at the crime scene. Next to them, with careful precision, she wrote one more. Rama, mercy. 6 were for faith, she whispered. The 7th should have been mercy. Outside, the call to prayer began again, beautiful, solemn, unchanged. She listened for a long moment, wondering how many people were praying for forgiveness tonight, and how many still prayed to be right. Then she closed her notebook and walked away, leaving behind the city that worshipped both faith and illusion in equal measure. Layla Mansour's soul, people said, was at peace. But her story lingered like incense in the air, a warning, a memory, a prayer turned into a crime.